A question that often comes back is multiverse. What comics do you read? Let's find out. Hello, true believers. Welcome to Multiverse. Today we are going to take a look at the Iron Man Masterwork, Volume 14. So let's get this party started. So basically, we are in the middle of what we could call the Demon in a Bottle era. Pretty much the best era of Iron Man comics that ever were. It started with the volume 13, where we have the Demon in Bottle storyline. But here we continue with David Michelinie, Bob Layton, and there's also Jerry Bingham that will pencil part of the run. But ironically enough, the first issue will be issue 129, and it will start with pretty much a fill-in issue. Or I should actually say a fill-in artist, because it is the continuation of the storyline. And the artist is Sal Buscema, one of the best artists Marvel had way back when. So having him as a fill-in artist is quite a treat. And you will see also in the credits, the inker is credited to M. Hans. Sometimes it would be Mike Hans. Sometimes it would be D. Hans. Basically, it would count as many hands. So M. Hands, many hands, meaning that a whole bunch of people contributed to the inking for that comic. It probably was a last minute job. They probably called Sal at the last minute saying, Sal, we need an Iron Man issue in like 3 days. And then they gave it to a whole bunch of inkers. And here we are. And usually rushed jobs like that don't produce quite the best results. So sometimes artists do not want their names attached to something they think might hurt their reputation. So here they're using M. Hans instead of the name of the various inkers, because odds are maybe the inkers did not want to be credited. Sadly, it takes a long time and a lot of work to be able to build a reputation, and it takes about 5 minutes to destroy it. So a bad inking job, or what some might perceive as a bad inking job on a comic, might actually ruin a career, so I can understand if people did not want to give their names. Although this is a pretty awesome comics, despite the many inkers. Also, way back when, they would assume that every comic was somebody's first comic. So very often at the head of Marvel Comics, they would put like a short description, a short paragraph explaining who the character is. Although it's kind of hard to read black on red, let's switch to another version. Much better. So when millionaire industrialist Tony Stark, inventor extraordinaire, garbs himself in solar charged steel mesh armor, he becomes the world's greatest human fighting machine, the invincible Iron Man. So right there and then you get a quick look, a quick portrait of the character. So here we pretty much have a continuation of the storyline where the evil Shield, you can see at the bottom what Shield standed for way back when. It changed a few times throughout the years, but way back when, this is what Shield actually meant. And Shield basically did a hostile takeover. They purchased, if you saw the previous volume, they purchased a whole bunch of stocks from Jarvis, and they were able to take control of Stark International. But then during the investors meeting, an emergency happens, so Nick Fury has to run away. But of course, Tony Stark, being the invincible Iron Man, he has to follow him. He sees that there's an emergency. Let's see if I can follow Nick. Here we have a pretty cool panel, a pretty cool reveal of the invincible Iron Man by our friend Sal Buscema. And way back when, we had the epic secret lairs that would make people making the James Bond movies green with envy. Because in comics, you can get special effects or hear secret lairs on a size and scale that is very difficult or very expensive to reproduce in movies. But in comics, all it takes is a pencil and an artist with a good imagination and good draftsmanship, of course. And then after that, we get what was my introduction to the Dreadnought. Basically, they were introduced a bit before in the Nick Fury comic book. I wasn't reading that comic at the time. It's something I read like maybe 20 years after the fact. It's some pretty awesome comics by James Steranko. I'll have to make a video about that at some point. And just as you think that Nick Fury is in way over his head, he has the invincible Iron Man to come and help him out. I won't spoil the rest of the story. I will let you guys read it for yourself. Ideally, I would like you guys to go and read those comics. Those were some pretty awesome comics, so I'm going to try to spoil as little as I can. So then we got another story that pretty much felt like a fill-in issue. It wasn't exactly, but it kind of felt like that. Like there's a few issues that kind of felt like fill-in issues from time to time. Although in this case it is by David McKillany and Bob Layton, so it should not be a filling issue, but it could be maybe an inventory story that they did on the side in case they needed a filling issue. It's kind of what it feels like. But in this issue, we see Tony Stark's business side. It's something they would do from time to time. They would try to put in some superhero action, of course, but they would try to show that Tony Stark is a businessman. But of course, things go wrong, and Tony has to go and change into the invincible Iron Man to solve the problem. It's one of the things that made superhero comics so awesome. You could have action sequences that were very inexpensive to produce. Although, ironically enough, this run is not all action. There's plenty of talking and plenty of character moments, but they had a great balance between the character moments, the quarter moments, the talking scenes, and the action scenes. And then we get Iron Man versus the Incredible Hulk. Enough said. And here we have Jerry Bingham, who will be the penciler for a while. Maybe that's why the previous two stories kind of felt like fill-in issues, because they were pretty much the transition between John Romita Jr. being the penciler and then Jerry Bingham becoming the penciler, at least for a while. If you saw my Batman Son of the Demon video, this is the same Jerry Bingham. Basically, he did the artwork for Batman Son of the Demon, but here he only did the pencils and was inked by Bob Layton. And the mixture of Jerry Bingham and Bob Layton together was great. Jerry Bingham is a pretty loose style, fairly dynamic, and then Bob Layton was able to add some great finisher over the artwork. So here we have Iron Man who decides to intervene with the Hulk situation. But holy plot twist, Batman! It's actually a little kid who will kind of resolve the situation. And it's going to be a fun bit where they're even going to be able to place some toys in that comic. It was a fun bit. So the kid makes makes the Hulk turn back into Bruce Banner, and then Iron Man can take him with him back to Stark International. Although he forgot to tell Miss Arbogast, and he almost gave her a heart attack. Tony is so mean sometimes. What made this run so great was the supporting cast. Not only Miss Arbogast, there'll be a scene much later in the book where we'll see a whole bunch of the cast. And the comic at the time had a great cast, and also they were trying to show the inventor side and the business side of Iron Man. So here we have Tony Stark and Bruce Banner who tried to create some sort of chip to prevent Banner from turning into the Hulk, and of course, things go wrong as they often do. So next we have Iron Man 132, and we will have some pretty cool fight between Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk. And as we saw, things didn't quite go as they were expecting. So they're able to contain Banner, who turned into sort of the Hulk somewhat. But then, of course, it only lasted for a while. Sooner or later, the Hulk would cut loose. And then we would have a pretty awesome fight between the Hulk and Iron Man. And then Iron Man would give the coup de grace. But there would be a bit of a twist that we'll see in the next issue. And here in Iron Man 133, we have the Ant-Man. Scott Lang was pretty much a supporting cast in the Iron Man comic at the time, and once in a while he would intervene as the Ant-Man. And sadly, as a result of Iron Man fighting the Hulk, it took so much to be able to defeat the Hulk so that it fused Iron Man's armor together, and now Tony Stark is pretty much stuck in his armor. It's a fun bit we've seen before. Way back when we had Ant-Man that had to go into the Vision, although at the time it was still Hank Pym who was still the Ant-Man. We had to go into the Vision at some point to repair the Vision from the inside, and then they did a reverse of that story where the Vision had to go into Henry Pym to give him some sort of medication straight to his heart. And here we have a fun variation on that theme where Ant-Man has to save Tony Stark. Again, I won't spoil the whole story, there's a few fun bits in here. So then we can move on to Iron Man 134, which will give us a reveal that we've been waiting for a long time. And it starts with a pretty cool Iron Man splash page. Although the comic will be a pretty quiet issue, it is going to be pretty much a day in the life of Tony Stark and Bethany Cabe. But it will end with a bang, with a reveal. If you guys saw the video about the volume 13, you will remember that there was this subplot where we were teased about the evil bad guy who was pulling the strings from behind the scenes, and now we finally have the reveal. The other is none other than the Titanium Man. And yeah, you could tell from the silhouette that it was Titanium Man way back when, But here we get the official reveal that that's actually who it is. So here we will get basically the conclusion to a subplot that's been going throughout the Iron Man comics for quite some time. We will get the end of the storyline with the other, which now we know is the Titanium Man. So of course Tony has to go and put on his armor. Pretty cool shot, and like the Iron Man shot you see here. These days it would be like a double, triple splash page. Way back when it was just one panel in the comic. And they would also give us a little flashback of what happened before. And way back when, they would try to treat each comic as if it was somebody's first comic. So they would try to give us as much backstory as possible, so that we would understand the story that is going on. So even if this was your first Iron Man story ever, they would try to give you all the information you needed to be able to understand what's going on. Although if you guys saw my video about the Avengers and the Kang War, you will remember that the Titanium Man was teaming up with the Crimson Dynamo and Radioactive Man within that comic. And yeah, I'm not going to spoil all that, but then we have Iron Man 136, which again would kind of feel like a fill-in issue or an inventory story. Although in this case we do have a guest writer, so maybe it was an inventory story that they decided to use. And here we have a villain called the Endotherm, who easily could have been the Blizzard or Jack Frost, so it makes me think that maybe this was a story of the Blizzard. Somehow they did not want or they could not use a Blizzard for whatever reasons, and they came up with what I would call a one-shot villain. A villain that we saw here one time, and that we will never ever see again. And this leads us to Iron Man 137. This here would be a great example of the supporting cast that Iron Man has built over the years. So we had Miss Arbogast, we had Mr. Fittins, we had Jarvis, the butler, we had Rhodey, Yvette. I think that's Vic Martinelli, the security guy. It would be a bit more important a bit later in the story involving the Blacklash, but it's going to be in the next volume. So one of the things that made this run so great was not only just the action adventure aspect of the comic, but also the huge character that was built over the years, issues by issues that were building up a cast for this comic. And it was a great cast. Very often the cast is as important as the main character itself, sometimes even more important. If we take the case of Spider-Man, Spider-Man had a great supporting cast. Betty Brant, then later Gloria Grant, Ned Leeds, Harry Osborn, Robbie Robertson, and of course, the big man himself, J. Jonah Jameson. The supporting cast is what makes Spider-Man so great, and that is why also you cannot just replace Peter Parker with anyone. People wonder why people are resistant to Peter Parker being replaced by Miles Morales. It's quite simple. Because Miles Morales does not have the supporting cast that Peter Parker has. Peter Parker has one of the greatest casts in any comics. And if you get rid of Peter Parker, sadly you lose most of the cast. And the cast is why Spider-Man comics were so great way back when. And the same is true over here. The supporting cast that Iron Man had at the time is one of the reasons why that comic was so great. Great supporting cast, great writer, great artist, great inker. We often hear that something is greater than the sum of its parts, but here each part was great, so when you put all these parts together, you end up with something not only great, it was masterful. But then of course, things go wrong, so now it's time for a bit of action. And we would see the return also of not quite a subplot, more like a running gag. In the previous volume, Tony kept on running into that poor lady, and so he turns into Iron Man to go try to solve the issue. And then we get Iron Man 138 and the return of the evil Dreadnought. So I guess we can see why the issue of the Dreadnought was not really a fill-in issue, seeing how it was planting the seeds for this upcoming storyline for the next 2 or 3 comics. Although sweet irony, for this issue we would have a guest inker, Tom Palmer. Tom Palmer was one of the best inker in the business, so having him as a guest inker was actually quite a treat. And we would also get a reveal of something that was planted way back when in some previous issues. Here we have the reveal of who hired the evil Spy Master way back when. And here we have Tony and Rhodey who have to fight off a whole bunch of goons once more, like they did before in the Demon in the Bottle storyline. And of course, the reveal that Madame Mask is behind everything. So of course, the continuation of the storyline with Madame Mask. And so we know she was the one behind the evil dreadnought. I guess she's still not too happy that Tony killed her father way back when, and we even get a bit of a flashback on what happened at the time. So again, they were trying to make sure that people had all the information they needed to enjoy the story. And here we have Rhodey, who's a bit over his head, but his friend, the old Iron Man, would help him out. And we get a face-off with Bethany Cape and the evil Madame Mask. This comic had it all. Action, intrigue, and even romance in a twisted way, in a weird, twisted love triangle between Madame Mask, Tony Stark, and Bethany Cape. I will let you guys find out how it turns out. And then we move on to Iron Man 140, which pretty much starts as a day in the life of Tony Stark. Basically, Tony Stark decides to take a vacation, something he didn't do in a while. And it pretty much starts as a slice of life comics. And even then, they still manage to give us some pretty cool Iron Man money shot in that comic. And they will also manage to introduce the Evil Force, although from what I understand he comes from the Submariner comic, but I had never seen him before I read that issue. So to me this pretty much was the introduction to Force, although he probably wasn't that popular because I don't recall seeing him a lot after that. And when Force and his evil group managed to take over the boat, Bethany Cape was able to throw the suitcase suit at the bottom of the ocean so that Tony Stark could put it on. And here we have a sequence where he does just that and turns into the invincible Iron Man. That was a cool money shot as well. And so we do have a bit of action towards the end of the issue. Sadly, too little too late, Iron Man was not able to stop the bad guys. And sadly we move on to what is probably one of the worst Iron Man cover I've seen in a long time. Although, to make up for it, we have the return of John Romita Jr. as the full-time artist on Iron Man. So it leads to a pretty cool fight against Force. Again, sadly, after that I saw him in maybe one or two issues, and that pretty much was the end of Force. And here we have the return of the evil Justin Hammer. Again, not only did Iron Man have a great supporting cast, he had some great villains. And then they decide to do something fun. They decide to send Iron Man into space. So Tony Stark comes back from his vacation, but there's a Nick Fury who's waiting for him. And basically he needs his help. There's a situation that happened that might originate from space, and he'll need Iron Man's help for that. But he will first help Iron Man fighting some evil bad guy that took over some big machinery and that's trying to cause a bit of chaos. And then we have Tony selecting a special suit of armor. We often see a whole bunch of armors in Tony Stark's lab. And here we can see that there was one of those armors that is actually useful to go into space. You would think that Iron Man would be a perfect way to be able to create a whole bunch of Iron Man toys. Basically, you could see all the Iron Man armors that Tony has in his lab, and they could make toys of all those armors, but somehow they never really did that. So thanks to this special armor, Iron Man will be able to go straight into space all by himself. And we will get an epic reveal of who the evil bad guys are, Roxxon Oil. Roxxon Oil was often used in Marvel Comics way back when as some sort of bad guys. I guess Marvel employees did not like big corporations way back when. And then Iron Man 143 will introduce us to a new character called Centurion. It's not a character we saw a lot after that. Basically, we saw it in the storyline. And then later on, they did try to bring back the character, but they did what they always do. They tried to bring it back as a female character. These days, it's pretty much systematic. They try to turn every male character into a female character, but it's something that was already being done way back when. Although I thought the Centurion was a fairly cool character, and at first it seems that Tony and the Centurion are going to be able to agree to help each other. Sadly, it turns out that they did not quite want the same thing, so they go into battle. Normally I would not spoil it, but the next issue will spoil it anyway. During their battle, they end up hitting the space station, and then they push the space station towards the Earth. And then Iron Man 144 is going to be pretty much a split book. The first part will be the continuation of our storyline with Centurion. So basically they push the satellite towards the Earth. They're going to have to work together to stop it. I'm going to let you find out what happens. And the next half of the comic is actually how Tony Stark met James Rhodes. Very often people were wondering, how did Iron Man manage to go back from Vietnam and come back all the way to the United States in his big armor? I guess this was their way to explain it. After the origin of Iron Man, which we see a flashback here, he met a guy named James Rhodes, and that is how they were able to come back together. So if you ever wondered how Tony Stark and James Rhodes met, then you have to read this issue. You have to, you have no choice. And we have a nice money shot of Iron Man into this issue as well. And that is pretty much the last issue of this volume. And then we get a few treats. We get some comic pages in black and white from way back when. Or in some cases, we'll even get some alternate covers. So you can see an alternate cover of the Hulk who's about to crush poor Iron Man. We also have an alternate cover for the Ant-Man issue. I have to admit, I kind of prefer the version they went with. And we also have another alternate cover right here. So if you get a kick of seeing artwork that was never used, this should be a treat for you. And also they're giving us this cover of Iron Man by Luke McDonald. I'm not sure why, because this cover has nothing to do with this current volume. Luke McDonald would draw Iron Man, but much later. But it's one of the cool covers he ever did. So I thought, why not keep it in here? And also they have a little bio of all the various creators that we saw in this volume. And it ends with the back cover, which is a bunch of the covers from this volume. So this is the second volume of the David Michelinie and Bob Layton era. Most of it was penciled by John Romita Jr., but you saw there's a chunk that was penciled by Jerry Bingham. And this is by far the best Iron Man era we ever had. After that, sadly, way too often creators, when they were struggling to come up with stories, they would go back to the Demon in the Ball storyline, and they would make Tony Stark a drunk again. So basically, whenever they would write themselves in a corner, or when they didn't know what storyline to do, they would have Tony pick up a bottle, become drunk, and there we go. Although ironically enough, David Michelinie and Bob Layton would come back on the book at some point, and they would give us the storyline The Armor Wars, which was a good storyline in itself, but sadly it was nowhere near as good as their previous work on the book. Although we still have one volume to go through before David Michelinie and Bob Layton would leave the book, but that is going to be a video for another time. Excelsior!